So we're almost 2 weeks into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the map really hasn't changed that much over the last week, which basically suggests that this thing has all ground to a logistical halt, which to me suggests that Russia is in desperate trouble. And, as the old saying goes, infantry win battles, logistics win wars. And on top of that, they're getting unsustainable losses in terms of, high tech weapons being shot down and, generals being killed, that sort of thing. So, so a example of why this is bad, I'm going to go to the last big war in the European theatre, which is, of course, World War II. We're going to take a look at the German invasion. Germans, by this time, they're all up to the border of Poland. We're in 1941, summer of 1941. Germany has amassed 3 million troops on this border, secretly, and has got them all well stocked, and 1 million men are going up to St. Petersburg, 1 million men are going to Moscow, and 1 million men are going towards the Crimea. And by the end of the year, they're going to do pretty well. They're going to get up to St. Petersburg. They're almost going to get to Moscow, and they're going to get down to. They actually get almost all the way to the end of the Crimea, but they get pushed back again. Now, of course, when you start, things are fantastic. You have surprise. You have lots of supplies very near your army. So the whole thing about this blitzkrieg is a war fought on the cheap. That you go on the basis that if you go quickly and you're all prepared before you go, then you have all your stocks for the war beforehand, and then you gobble them up as you go and you get your objectives and you're done. Problem comes is, what if you don't get your objectives and you run out of supplies? Logistics. Yeah, this is the universal problem that all the time they're near the kickoff points. They have overwhelming firepower when they're pushing in. Very, very good supplies of food, water, and ammunition. By the time you get all the way up to here, now all of a sudden your food's got to be transported all the way to the front, as does your water and your ammunition. And all right, you might say, well, we'll get it locally. Well, that's all very good and well, but what if there isn't any food locally? Then all of a sudden your army sort of faces starvation. So you need the logistical support to at least keep your troops fed and watered and all that sort of thing. Now, the Germans had only budgeted for, they thought that, seeing as Russia had just fought this war with Finland and done terribly, that this would be an absolute cakewalk. All they basically had to do was drive to Moscow. Sounds kind of like a rerun of something we've seen more recently, that the whole thing is just completely rubbish, and all we have to do is roll in the tanks and they'll collapse and everything will be hunky-dory. And initially, it did actually sort of look that way, in that when they first invaded these people, Ukraine had a very tough time under Stalin. He'd stolen all that grain and there'd been mass starvation, all that sort of thing. There was no love for Stalin in Ukraine. Apart from then, it turned out that, it became fairly clear that the Germans' plan for them was extermination. And the old saying goes, we had the choice of the dictator who spoke Russian and the one who spoke German. We chose the one who spoke Russian. So, once you've lost the goodwill of the people, now you're kind of screwed. If you want to actually, you've got your troops outside Moscow, you've got to move food and water and fuel all the way up to the front, all the way, right? Initially, you had 1 million men. I mean, just the logistics of moving 1 million men this far. 1 million men is a decent-sized city. Just the logistics of moving these people is a bloody nightmare. That's before you consider the idea that, there are people out here trying to kill you. And even worse, once you've diluted your force, you've had to occupy all of this area along the route. And so you've got two problems. The first one is the dilution of the front line. You start with a fairly short front line, and by the end of it, your front line is this thing. So even if you just disperse your troops along the front line, it's 3 to 4 times weaker once you get all the way out here, which means it's harder to keep everything cohesive. And the second is you've lost loads of your force actually just trying to occupy this area. And when you think about it, 3 million men to occupy this area, it's not a lot of men. So, the old saying is it was winter that defeated the Russians. It really wasn't. Their logistics had mostly, they were really hanging on by the time they'd got about halfway to Moscow. It was getting pretty desperate for the Germans. The only thing was, it was even more desperate for the Russians. But the point is that without the logistics, by the time they got to Moscow, they hadn't planned for a war going on this long. And if you've not planned for a war going on that long, and you're suddenly fighting that war, all of a sudden, things can get desperate very quickly. And, so the real sign to the world that things were going wrong is the Germans didn't have any winter clothing. And of course, you can't just make Russian winter clothing for your army overnight. So there's big appeal for winter clothes to be sent to the front line, anything. And you always got to be a bit suspicious about stuff you find online. But I came across this on Twitter, which claims it's reinforcements heading into Russia. And the thing that makes it, right, okay, this could just be a train and someone sort of photoshopped on all of the Z's. Entirely possible. However, this is basically exactly what you would want if your logistical supplies were absolutely trash in Russia. Is basically any transit van, people movers, anything that'll carry lots of people or lots of stuff, which is exactly what you see. And the thing that this is what really solidifies it for me is that this looks real. Is you've got 3 either water trucks or fuel trucks. So I mean the composition here is exactly what you would expect if the supply situation has got truly desperate. And if things get truly desperate, anything is better than nothing. And if you're now reduced to commandeering in this sort of thing to move your supplies and your people around, that looks like things are going south for Russia in the most spectacular fashion. And of course, this is on the back of, they've actually had some fairly advanced planes shot down, these guys. So these guys they've only got 150 of them in total. And this is the thing about the modern military, is the number of units that are fought with is bloody tiny. These were sort of daily losses in World War II, but they were replenished also sort of daily. With these, there aren't any more of these things being built. Once these things are blown up, it'll be 5-10 years before they're replaced. And if it's like the American fleet, all these modern things, they require lots of maintenance. So typically, a third of these will be being maintained in one way, shape, or form. So if it's true that that 4 of them already have been shot down, which, there's certainly video of at least 2 of them being shot down. And they're not cheap. They're, 50 odd million have shot these things. So now you're looking at 4% of their advanced fighter bomber force has gone to, and a lot of dollars as well. These things are not cheap. Yeah, that's not good. And there's also certainly video of loads of abandoned Russian kit, which is symptomatic that you've run out of fuel. You run out of fuel. A $10 million uh, anti-air unit, surface to air missile tank, that sort of thing. It's just it's target practice once it's out of fuel and out of people to support it. And so it looks to me that Russia planned. They had 200,000 men. Actually, quite a lot of men. It took them a long time to build up the men, and I think they're only budgeting for a week-long war. The idea was they were going to fly in their troops to airport in Kiev, and then they were going to storm Kiev, roll the tanks in, boom, we're done. That's it. Then nothing really more than just a good strong flex, and it'll be the end for Ukraine. And it's not turned out that way. Ukraine has almost as many troops as Russia does, and the important bits that they need to take, cities, even if you had the more advanced weapons, they don't really count for that much in cities, because if you're attacking cities with fairly expensive fighter bombers, well, they and the defenders have Stinger missiles that can shoot them down. This becomes a very expensive war of attrition that if you've only got 100 or so units in to start with, that you really just can't afford to fight. And for me, this is worrying, because if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, would any sane man, there was no chance that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. It would have been irrational. It would have been stupid. And all this was just basically flexing. Militaries are one of those things. Whether you put them on exercises or not doesn't really make any difference, because you're going to pay for them anyway. So it's basically just the fuel cost of moving things around. But now all of a sudden, once you're in a shooting war, if you've not got enough shells to supply your troops, they can't do an awful lot. And you're shelling cities. Okay, just looking at it from a strictly logistical point of view, you've got to shift. You need like factories churning out these shells to actually be able to do significant damage to cities. You need this huge logistical flow of supplies. And even at that, demolishing a city will never get you greeted as liberators. And it's completely changed all attitudes, both in Ukraine and across Europe. So, as a general rule, there has always been a passive, not racism, but looking down on people to the east. So in the UK, we used to have a shortage of plumbers, and so we get a load of plumbers would come in from Poland. It used to be the meme is the Polish plumber. Of course, they would be happy to do this because it was well paid, and the UK was happy for this because they didn't have enough plumbers. But it was a grumbling point. It was something you were never entirely happy about. It was, when you didn't have anything else to complain about, you complained about the Polish plumbers. And, similarly, the Germans complain about the Poles, the Czechs complain about the Ukrainians, always used to come in, work in the supermarkets, do the lowly paid jobs, and they never quite learned the language and blah, 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 blah. It was always basically a low-key grumbling point. And this has evaporated overnight in that, at the coming of the Cold War Russians, all sins are forgiven. Poland basically just opens its border and lets a million refugees in, this is not a small ask. And everyone who's basically, it's the sad thing that NATO really can't get involved in a shooting war. Well, they can. And if they do, it's clear that as a conventional challenge, Russia really isn't going to go anywhere. Um, they can barely get, 50 kilometers is almost the full extent of where they're going to go. Yeah, a lot of these needle-like pushes and the such like, these are an absolute disaster. You don't need many people to just snick the road, blow up the road, and everything after this is basically cut off in enemy territory, and it either has to be abandoned or decommissioned, basically blown up by your own forces. Either way, it's losses. And so even if they surround Ukraine, it's yeah, it's not good. But all of this is basically bought with Ukrainian blood, and uh, Putin's been saber rattling. Previously he was saber rattling about invading Ukraine. I thought, whatever. He's full of crap. He's never going to do it. And now he's saber rattling about how he's got 500 nukes in submarines that can, annihilate all the NATO countries. Um, yeah. Had he not had form in the last 2 weeks for doing something that's just bloody crazy, I would just blow this off as pointless saber rattling. But now he's backed into a corner and saber rattling. And this really has taken me and my brother, who grew up in the Cold War. And in the Cold War, this is the sort of thing that I had on TV when I was a kid.
First, if you are at home, if attack is imminent, you will hear the attack sound like this.
Yeah, right. And then it goes on to, turn off the gas. Your fallout warning will be 3 bangs. And if you're outside, hide under a bridge. And, if that doesn't work...
Lie flat in a ditch or a hole and cover your head, face, and hands as fast as you can with some of your clothes. If you hear the fallout warning...
Yeah, lie in a ditch in the ground if the air attack warning is sounded. Yeah, so you get 4 minutes warning basically between when the radar picks it all up and they can actually get the reaction out to the people. That was what you would get in the UK, and it was made very clear in this movie called Threads. Which the BBC gets very picky about its copyright on, so I won't play it. But it's basically nuclear war kicks off and what it would be like in the UK. And large portions of it are actually modestly accurate. Nice thing is it's set in the 80s, so no one has any cell phones or anything. Not that any of that'll make any difference. Early on in the nuclear war, you get these EMP weapons. They're not detonated near any strategical targets. They're detonated high in the atmosphere, and it's like one of these warheads will EMP basically the entire of America. And likewise, one above the North Sea basically trashes most of the electronics in Europe. And so that's the first sign that things are going south, is all the electronics stop working. This was sufficiently horrific that apparently Reagan saw it, and it sort of solidified it in his mind that, maybe nuclear war is not a good idea. And so at the next summit they had, he caught the Russians completely off guard by suggesting that they just decommission half of the nuclear weapons, which wouldn't have really made any difference. Half was still enough to sort of, annihilate almost everything. But, and when I say annihilate everything, probably not in the way that you think. Because what generally trashes a country is loss of infrastructure. So you don't have to blow up much in a first world country. They're like organisms. You cut the right nerve or the right artery, and things go south very quickly. You take out the wrong organ, and things like this can be very easily demonstrated in about 10 years ago, maybe 20, I can't remember. There was a blockade of the oil from the refineries in the UK. I think that's what it was. Basically, the truckers were protesting fuel prices or something. And within about a week of blockade of just truckers blocking these ports, the UK was getting close to being on its knees. Everything was kind of grinding to a halt. And this was just a few truckers. You blow up the power stations and the ports, and the UK is in desperate shape. In the modern countries, about 2% of the people grow the food for everyone. And the reason they can do that is because they have internal combustion engines that do a lot of work for them. You take that internal combustion engine out of the picture, and all of a sudden, basically, all people become farmers. And if you're in a big ass city like this, these things are only viable because you get food from outside that is shipped in, again, by internal combustion engines that run on gas. Everything basically without the gas stops. And this is before you actually consider nuking cities. So just destroying the ports and the power stations is usually enough to cripple a country. Well, I mean, just think about it. You turn off the power, and communications die, and heating dies. There's no internet, no computers. All that's gone. And then you actually sort of drop a few nukes on the cities as well, and everything goes south very quickly. So that was, what I lived with throughout the Cold War. And I've never seriously considered someone firing nukes seriously since. But if your only reliance on Putin not doing this is it would be really stupid, he's got this is not a good reason. Um, so yeah, there was this thing called mutually assured destruction that if your Russia is just as vulnerable to this sort of thing as everyone else. You blow up the power stations, and all of a sudden Moscow, whether you nuke it or not, is a death trap. There's just no food in there, and yeah, you've got to get out of the city and grow enough food to survive winter. It's just not going to happen. So even before you consider nuking cities, the loss of civilization is crippling. Um, So, yeah, I've been entertaining thoughts. I've not thought. I mean, for me, I'm screwed. I'm in a big city, so this is would be bad news bears for me. But uh, yeah, well, what is Putin's exit strategy here? He's already sort of cracked down at home, and anyone describing it as a war or similar can get up to 15 years in jail. This is pure old school Soviet era stuff. The war is way too costly for him to afford fighting at this sort of cost. He's fighting with non-replaceable assets. Yeah, what's his exit strategy here? Anyway, so yeah, it feels like playing Russian roulette with the guy who's suicidal. Well, let's hope we stay lucky. And with that, I'll wish you good luck and see you next time.